Morocco versus Spain, 2022 World Cup, round of 16, penalties. Last kick. Achraf Hakimi walks to the spot. Entire stadium watching. Goalkeeper bouncing on his line. And Hakimi chips it. Right down the middle. A Panenka. The most audacious penalty you can take in football. Goalkeeper dives, ball floats in, Morocco wins, Spain go home. Here's the detail that matters. The kid who just eliminated Spain was formed by Real Madrid, born in Madrid, raised in Madrid, speaks Spanish, and years before that penalty, when the moment came to choose which national team to represent, the Spanish Federation wanted him, and he said no. Think about what that no cost him. Spain won the World Cup in 2010, 3 European championships. Choosing Spain would have meant bigger tournaments, more exposure, more of everything. He said no anyway, and then stepped up in a penalty shootout against Spain and chipped the ball down the middle with a smile. That is not a story about football. That is a story about identity. And a French-Algerian philosopher named Albert Camus, who died before Hakimi was born, is the only person who really explains what Hakimi actually chose. Achraf Hakimi was born in 1998 in Getafe, a working-class suburb of Madrid where a lot of Moroccan immigrant families settled. His father sold clothes in the street. His mother cleaned houses. He grew up caught between two worlds, Spanish enough for the streets, Moroccan enough to never forget where the family came from. At 8 years old, he was spotted by Real Madrid. Over the next decade, he became exactly what they hoped for. Fast, technically exceptional, completely composed. He had lived his entire life in Spain, and when the moment came to choose which national team to represent, he was eligible for both Spain and Morocco. The Spanish Federation was watching him closely. He chose Morocco. He was 18 years old. He chose the country his parents had left behind and carried with them everywhere they went. And the question worth asking is not whether it was the right decision. The question is, what was really happening in that choice? What was he actually choosing when he chose Morocco? Albert Camus was born in 1913 in Algeria, which at the time was a French colony. His father died in the First World War when Camus was barely a year old. He grew up in a tiny apartment in Algiers, in real poverty, almost no books in the house. And somehow, he became one of the most important writers of the 20th century. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature. He wrote The Stranger and The Plague and The Myth of Sisyphus. And he played football. He was a goalkeeper for the university team in Algiers. Later in life, he said, "All that I know most surely about morality and obligations, I owe to football. Not to the books, not to the universities, not to the great philosophers he had studied. Football." A man who thought harder about human existence than almost anyone in the 20th century said that the thing that taught him the most about how to live was the game. And what Camus kept writing about his whole career was one central idea. We are born into circumstances we did not choose, but we are not defined by those circumstances. What defines us is what we decide to do with them. Who we choose to be when the moment comes to choose. Camus grew up caught between two worlds, French by passport, Algerian by feeling. He wrote about that tension his whole life, the sense of not fully belonging anywhere. And what he concluded was that this is not a tragedy. It is actually the most human condition there is. Because all of us, not just immigrants and their children, but all of us, are born into a situation we didn't ask for and spend our lives figuring out what to do with it. Hakimi had the easier path right there. Spain was right there. He had lived there his whole life, built his entire career there. The Federation wanted him. Choosing Spain would have been completely logical. But logic was not what that decision was about. His parents had crossed a border with almost nothing because they believed in something. That sacrifice had become part of who Hakimi was. And when the moment came to say out loud who he said Morocco. Not because Morocco was the rational choice, because Morocco was the true choice. Because the story his parents had lived was the story he wanted to be part of. Camus would have understood that immediately. Camus spent his life saying that authenticity, the courage to be who you actually are rather than who it would be convenient to be, is the only thing that really matters. Hakimi didn't choose a country. He chose to be his parents' son. And that is exactly the kind of choice Camus spent his entire life writing about. There are millions of kids in Europe right now living some version of Hakimi's story. Born in one country, raised between two cultures, feeling like they belong fully to neither. And the world keeps asking them to choose, as if identity were a passport and you could only have one. Camus thought that was a false question. Identity is not something you are handed at birth. It is something you build through your choices, through what you decide matters, through who you show up for. When Hakimi runs down that right flank for Morocco, he is not making a political statement. He is just playing football. But every time he does it, he is also answering Camus' question with his body, saying, "This is who I am. This is what I decided was true about myself." And the image of him and his mother on the pitch after Morocco beat Spain, her hands on his face, his head on her shoulder, that is not a footnote to a football story. That is what it looks like when someone chooses authentically, and then gets to stand inside the thing they chose and feel what it means. Albert Camus died in a car accident in 1960 at 46 years old. He never got to see a kid from Getafe illustrate his philosophy more clearly than any essay he ever wrote. But he would have recognized that Panenka, not because of the audacity of the kick, but because of everything it represented. The choice was never between Spain and Morocco. It was between the identity that circumstances offered and the identity that was true. Hakimi chose the true one, and then chipped the ball down the middle against the country he didn't choose, with a smile. Camus would have said that's the only choice that was ever worth making. If this is the kind of football you want to think about, there's more where this came from. Subscribe, and we'll keep going.